Welcome back, whisky fans. This video here is going to be my little address on the state of whisky going forward into 2024, or at least the state of whisky as I see it. This was originally going to be part of my Whisky of the Year video 2023, but I think I decided to cut it because I think it would have made the whole thing a little bit too long. So where are we now with whisky? It's been about a year since I've had a little whinge and a little rant or thereabouts. What's changed over the last 12 months? Where are we? What's good? What's not so good? Well, I think to start with, you can't really move forward without knowing where you've come from. So let's talk about 2023. For me, and I think for many people who are into the malt enthusiasts, I think 2023 has been the year of new distilleries. Some people will have done their best to ignore them and avoid them, which is fine, fair enough, because they're rarely the best value whisky out there, but I think it's a shame to ignore them completely because they're doing some very interesting things, and let's face it, a lot of them are going to be the future of Scotch whisky. So yeah, 2023, the year of small, new, independent, a lot of them, craft distilleries. And I think that it says it all that when I started my little mini-series on new distilleries, I kind of expected the whole thing to last for about a month, maybe. I was going to cover, I think, probably the Loch-Lee, and I can't remember what else, probably the Wolfburn. That was an early one that I bought, and I thought that it would take about a month, probably 4 reviews, and then I'd be done. Turns out that about a year later, and it's still on and off happening, and that really shows how there are so many new distilleries popping up in Scotland and England as well, probably a similar rate across the border in England. And of course, world whisky around the world, distilled spirits is a big thing. And when you look at Scotch and English whisky, a lot of those new distilleries are already key parts of the new whisky landscape. Talking about distilleries like, obviously, Ardnamurchan, Loch-Lee, Wolfburn, Kingsbarns, Lag, which makes sense when you consider just how many of these new whisky distilleries are, that some of them, at least some of them, have got to be pretty good. I do think, though, that out of all of these new distilleries, because they all have such a focus on quality, I think that the very best ones are really going to give a bit of a shake-up and a bit of a wake-up for the Scotch world as it is at the moment. Almost all of these new distilleries have a strong commitment to quality, transparency, and good presentation that many of the more established brands are still in denial about. I do think that things in the world of whisky are certainly changing, and it's not just the world of whisky that's changing. My preferences and my opinions have shifted slightly as well. I think if 10 years ago you had said that I would now be as open and enthusiastic about these no-age statement whiskies and these low-age statement whiskies as I am now, I absolutely wouldn't have believed you. And I can see other malt enthusiasts starting to go in a similar direction. People like myself who in the past might have described themselves as a little bit of an age snob, an age statement snob. And I don't really even mean that in a derogatory way. I have always and continue to like my higher age statement whiskies. I think that they can give a phenomenal experience. But I'm also now starting to be more open to whiskies which offer a similar level of quality in a different way. And in a different way by offering a different kind of quality at a younger age. And I think that change has happened for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because many of these new distilleries are releasing whisky which is actually good at 10 years or under. And that's not something that I can really remember happening regularly with any other distillery that opened kind of prior to 10 years ago. When you compare the kind of things that we're getting out of Ardnamurchan and Loch-Lee and Lag now, you compare those to the early attempts at no-age statement whisky. I think there's no two ways about it. The early attempts at no-age statement whisky were outright cash grabs, driven by greed, deliberate attempts to reduce the quality hopefully without too many people realising. And obviously Glenlivet was the prime example of that. Glenlivet with their plan to replace their short-lived plan to replace the 12-year-old with the Glenlivet Founders Reserve. They found out very quickly that people don't want a substandard product. And the second reason, you can only watch your list of affordable 18-year-old Scotch whiskies dwindle and become less and less over the years for so long before you feel compelled to try something else. In my opinion, the thoughtfully crafted, higher ABV, non-chill filtered, natural colour whiskies with full transparency coming out of the new distilleries these days are a refreshing change. It is not going to be easy, it's not going to be painless, it's going to require a little bit of recalibrating of our tastes and preferences, but there is still quality out there. But it is going to take a little bit of work, and the quality that we get going forward is not necessarily going to be the same well-aged flavour profile that we've become used to. So that's kind of my prediction, my premonition for the way that us malt enthusiasts are going to have to start to think if we want to continue to have the same range of quality whiskey that we used to have. Regarding the industry as a whole, people seem to still be occasionally talking about this Scotch whisky bubble bursting, and talk as they will, it still hasn't happened. It does seem a little bit like things are starting to slow down though. At least if auction prices are any measure to go by, I think we see it all around us that people are buying less whiskey, they're being more discerning, they're choosing what they really need, as opposed to just constantly chasing the new shiny. And I do think that for a lot of whiskey companies, things are going to be a little bit tougher going ahead. To survive, I think a lot of companies are going to have to choose, they're going to have to pick their lane. Do they want to get good at surviving on thin margins, or do they want to reluctantly offer us quality? I think that it's been almost unanimous that the new distilleries that are coming out in Scotland and England at the moment, they are arriving at an alarming rate and they are delivering on that ultimatum and they are choosing quality. I'm seeing very, very, very few products coming from new distilleries that aren't at least mostly craft. And I can think of only one distillery that's opened recently which is offering what I would call a consumer grade presentation. And by that I mean like 40% and chill filtered and all that bad stuff. Although I suppose if you considered Rose Isle and Dalmunich with a lot of their produce going into blends, you could argue that they are consumer presentations. And that does highlight what I think's happening. I think going forward we're going to see more and more smaller distilleries offering a quality product, and more of the larger distilleries focusing on high volume, low margins, low quality. Anyone who thinks they're going to get away with sticking in that middle ground of offering a substandard level of quality for a mid-range price, I think that's going to be a real mistake if they don't start to listen to what people are asking for. Speaking of not listening to us, I think that one thing that has happened in 2023 is a continued disinterest in the Diageo special releases range. Going back probably the last 3 years at least, the prices for the Diageo special releases range has been going up and up, steady incline, constant, can we call it incremental? Constant significant price hikes on most of their products, and that includes things like Talisker 18 and Oban 14s going up and up in price, but especially those special releases. And I feel sorry for fans of the Lagavulin 12 cask strength, because that whiskey is loved by a lot of people, and it seems like they just smack another sort of £10 on the price every year. And I think that people are really starting to be over that style of whiskey, at least us malt enthusiasts. I'm seeing very few people willing to take up Diageo on their special releases, at least at full price. As I've said before though, I think that the whole point of the Diageo special releases is not necessarily to sell whiskey. They don't necessarily exist to be bought, they exist to be seen and to normalise high prices and to train us into accepting high prices across the board. And it's probably working to some extent, probably on all of us to some extent. We're all having to accept that prices are higher now, and it's very unlikely that they're going to go back down without something catastrophic. Nobody is immune to propaganda, as they say. But I think that an increasing number of people are getting increasingly annoyed and looking for alternatives. All we can do, in my opinion, is to continue to seek that value and regularly ask ourselves if what we're drinking is really justifying the time and the price that we're putting into it, and preferably do that before we buy if possible. I do think that kind of the problem with luxury whiskey these days is that it's a little bit of a house of cards. I think that what some producers are doing now, it's kind of an Icarian effort to try and erode some of the market towards the bottom of the pyramid, to try and build a more prestige and frankly overpriced product at the top. But I think that you have to be very careful with that, because the whole point of prestige is that expensive bottle of whiskey, these people are buying them to be seen to be buying them, to be seen to be drinking them, and to be seen to be owning them. And if what you're doing is constantly eroding the loyal base of drinkers at the bottom of the pyramid, all in the interests of marketing increasingly fantastical, overpriced, and grotesquely marketed whiskies, all in the interests of adding more of those unicorns, those prestige products, those whiskies to be seen to be being bought. If you gouge everyone so much that they all eventually turn away, then there's no prestige to be seen in owning one of those unicorns. That's the problem with basing a business on selling something that has little to no actual value. It's all really a confidence trick, and once you lose that confidence and undermine your business plan, everything falls down. So, what do we want going forward? That's enough talk about where we are and where we've been. What do we want going forward into 2024? So what do I want for 2024? More quality and value whiskey. Kind of goes without saying, good whiskey but priced for drinking. Something else that I would really like for 2024, or for the future in general, is probably not going to be a quick thing, but there's a good example here in my bottle of Claren. That the stopper in this one, and I'll compare it to even our Ardnamurchan here, who are, shall we say, progressive and dynamic and kind of receptive to what we want. Natural cork stopper on our good old Ardnamurchan. Whereas this bottle of rum costs about the same, probably a little bit less than the cask strength Ardnamurchan. This is not cask strength because it's never seen a cask, but it is still strength. Synthetic stopper. And a lot of rum has this, probably the majority of rum, and I think every bottle of Claren that I've ever bought, with the exception of one, has always had a synthetic stopper. And I would love to see Scotch whisky adopting more synthetic stoppers, or at least trying something new. Because this year alone I've had 2 bottles of spirits that have had corks that have just snapped clean off as I've tried to pull them out, and I've had 1 bottle of spirit this year, bearing in mind that I've not bought a hell of a lot. I've had 1 bottle which was actually cork tainted to the point where it essentially semi-ruined the contents, made it quite hard to drink, even though what was actually distilled and put into that bottle was very, very high quality. So why? Why is Scotch still obsessed with this old-fashioned notion that we have to use natural cork? There are multiple viable options now that don't involve cork, and I think it's time that the Scotch whisky industry realise that. For anything, me personally, anything that I intend to open soon after purchase, my preference is a synthetic stopper. And for long-term storage, we obviously don't know, but they're probably fine for that too. But somebody needs to try. Something else that I'd really like to see for 2024 and going forward is less marketing BS and rapid fire releases. So we all know what distilleries and what brands we're talking about there. And I think that a lot of people are starting to get annoyed with that as well. And rightly so. When a distillery that you love and kind of trust starts to become more about the marketing and the gimmicks, and the prices go up to try and kind of match those gimmicks, and you feel like the quality is being left behind a little bit, And on the other side of that coin, something else I'd like to see for 2024 is more distilleries addressing the core range, which is hopefully something that I'm going to be doing in 2024, when I'm hoping to get around to reviewing some really good core range stuff that's been in my review queue for far too long. Some people may disagree, but me personally, I think that any distillery needs a solid core range. It's a really important part of any distillery's identity, and it's really valuable to have repeatable core range products as opposed to more batchy releases that you can go back to time and time and get something where you know what to expect. Obviously, a little bit of batch variation is fine and welcome, but I am a strong believer in solid quality core range products. In my opinion, any distillery that doesn't have at least an affordable entry-level option, perhaps a mid-range and a premium option, all probably below the £120 mark, all 46% natural colour, non-chill filtration, any distillery that hasn't got that isn't trying. We also need affordable cask strength options for those that want them. That is the minimum core range that any distillery should be offering, in my opinion. Something else that I'd really like to see for 2024, and this kind of ties into some of my thoughts that I had at the end of my Whisky of the Year video when I was talking about the Ardnamurchan cask strength, and the way that a lot of people are jumping on this bandwagon now, and there's always the danger that it's going to become another Springbank unobtainium. The next thing that I'd like to see for 2024 is better availability and sustainable supply. Now, that's obviously a tricky one, because the only real solution to that the producers can take that isn't painful to the consumer is to expand, and expanding is always risky if you don't get those future orders to pay for that expansion. But availability and sustainable supply that ensures availability for the future is definitely something that I want to see. At the end of the day, the best whiskey in the world is beyond worthless if we can't buy it. Next thing that I'd love to see for 2024, and probably this is the one that's most likely to actually happen, is to see some more mature releases from some of these new distilleries that we've all been trusting and kind of investing in by giving them our custom. And by that, I don't necessarily mean old, because age statements enable flippers and hikes prices, which is no good to the drinkers. Thinking of things like the recent Kilhoman 16-year-old release, that's not really any good to anyone. What I'm saying is essentially new distilleries, what next? Because hopefully all of these new distilleries, they're not burning through all of their stocks, hopefully they're keeping something back, so they're going to have a wider palette of casks to blend and vat with. One thing that I would really like to see going forward is some of these new distilleries not necessarily offering increasing age statements, which may or may not be better than the excellent stuff that we're getting at the moment, but I'd really like to see some of those distilleries taking some of that old stock that they're building up and using it to feed back into their future releases, top dressing the vattings with something to add a little bit of flavour and character. Constant and regular improvement rather than just the occasional single cask age statement that nobody can afford to drink anyway. And the last thing on my little wish list of things for the whiskey world in 2024 is a shake-up of the whiskey categories. And ironically, it's actually drinking rum that's made me realise this, or rather it's drinking rum that's made me realise that there is a better way to do these things. At the moment, we have this problem with whiskey, in particular Scotch whiskey, that as soon as you use a column still or a grain other than malted barley, or both, it immediately goes into this grain whiskey category that tells us nothing at all about what it is, and most people just assume that it's crap and they don't buy it. Problem is that a column still malted barley spirit is probably as different to a pot distilled, say, rye whiskey, as both of them are different to single malt. And it really does a lot of things that are being made now, and a lot of things that could be being made now, a massive disservice to lump them all into the same category as the stuff that they used to pad out Famous Grouse and Johnny Walker Red Label. People see grain whiskey on a label, and what they read is Hay Clubman. I think that that's the inevitable assumption from our current system, and I think that it's unfairly limiting innovation within our whiskey. It's actually really ironic that it should be drinking rum that's made me start thinking about how there are better ways to do this, because quite frankly, rum laws around the world are a bit of a shit show. There's not a lot of common consensus when it comes to how rum should be legally defined. Every country has its own ideas, and a lot of them have really lax regulations allowing a lot of shady stuff. But when you look at what some rum producers like Foursquare are doing now with the labelling of their rums, when they describe something as like a pot and column single blend made from molasses or cane syrup or fresh cane juice or whatever it is, I think that's really great. It tells you exactly what it is that you've got in the bottle. You know exactly what you're buying, and it gives you a better informed idea of what that rum is going to be like and what it's going to taste like. Whereas with Scotch whisky, from the label, a lot of the time you know if it's a single malt or not, and that really doesn't tell you a lot. There are so many different things which are being made now and which could be made that all get lumped under grain whisky. So what do we do about this? Probably asking the SWA to make new official categories can be confirmed as a waste of time. The SWA have kind of demonstrated in the past that they won't move on anything unless it protects their business interests. So until the masses stop buying Johnny Walker, that's probably not going to happen. But what I think would be really good is if instead of, or as well as putting grain whisky on the label, they also came up with more descriptive classifications, kind of similar to what Foursquare are doing with their rums. And this is obviously not something that you're going to get on your budget offerings of blended Scotch whisky, but I think if our whiskies and our grain whiskies actually told us a little bit more about what was in the bottle, that would probably open up some more options and make various grain whisky styles a little bit more marketable. Especially in England, where the SWA is irrelevant, there's really no reason not to kind of improve these classifications, and I think it would allow a lot of interesting spirits, probably along the lines of some of the things that we've had from Loch Lomond Distillery later, and a little bit more detail in the labelling and the classifications might allow some of those styles of grain whisky, as we currently call it, to meet a bit of a broader audience and become a little bit more common. So that's kind of what I would love to get from whisky, Scotch whisky and wild whisky, grain whisky, any type of whisky in 2024. Something else that I want to talk about is what I've got planned for the year ahead. And the first one, as I've mentioned, is definitely to review some more quality core range products. I've got quite a few sets of bottles on my shelf, like the Deanston 12 Virgin Oak and the 18, and I've got a set of Glenmorangies and Glenlivets, Lafroigs, Ardbegs, lots of things where I can do a little vertical of various offerings from one distillery's core range. It's been a long time coming, and I've been meaning to get around to these kind of reviews for a long time, and to be honest, I'm really looking forward to getting my teeth into some quality core range products as opposed to some of the more niche new distillery offerings that I've been looking at this year. So probably now or very soon is the time to draw a line under new distilleries and get down to it. This next thing that I've got planned for 2024 might be a little bit of a surprise to some of you, especially some of you that have watched the last month of my content on YouTube, and that's another advent calendar. It seems like the feedback that I've had from the advent that I did over December, it seems that people really like it. And I really like it too, but it is a hell of a lot of work, especially when you're trying to cram it into 25 days. So what I was thinking was perhaps next year or in 2024, rather than having an advent calendar to do over the 25 days of December, to have another advent calendar and maybe spread out some random blinds throughout the year. And to that end, I've actually bought this one here. So this is another Master of Malt calendar, which although we were perhaps a little bit disappointed or not as impressed with some of the Master of Malt calendars as we were with a really good whiskey company Cask Explorer calendar. But this one is the single cask whiskey advent calendar. So I bought this in 2023, and it says 2023 on the back, and it's got an average ABV of 54.1%. I think this could be a good one. I think that it could be a really good thing for my channel to have, like, an occasional blind dram, just to mix things up and maybe explore some good single cask offerings and discover some new things. Something else that I should probably have another think about is something like Patreon. If anyone's got any ideas of what I could do there, then let me know. But the reason why I think I should have another think about it is because I've had several people directly contribute to the channel over the last 12 months. Not many, but some do, and that's fine. And I'm eternally grateful to everyone who has contributed to this channel in comments or in donations. But at this point I should probably look into getting a way for that to happen without YouTube taking such a massive cut. One thing that I am reluctant to do, though, is to do what a lot of people do and put certain sort of premium content behind a paywall. I really don't want to do that. I don't want this to be a kind of pay-to-play thing where people are, like, loyal fans are priced out of certain content. That's not what I want, but there probably should be something there. Final thing, I probably should talk about the bottle ban. So I started 2023 with a decision not to buy any more whiskey. And I think it started off well. It all went a little bit sideways in the last couple of months. But to be fair, I think I have bought much less than I would have. And I think it's been very useful for me to kind of take the foot off the gas, take a little bit of step back, and spend a little bit more time considering what I really need and what's really worth the price. Did I buy zero whiskey in 2023? No. But I did. I reassessed why I buy and what I should be buying, and I think that that's something really useful and something that we could probably all benefit from. And going forwards into 2024, I'm not going to get rid of the bottle ban, but I think I'm also not going to try and stick to zero bottles either. I'm going to stick to a limited and sensible amount of purchases in 2024 because I still have a lot to thin out on the shelves. And I think it's good for all of us to think about what we actually need and what really deserves a purchase. So that's my thoughts. Let me know how your Whisky 2023 went and what you're hopeful about for the coming year. Thanks for joining me, and cheers to 2024. Right, well, that's another video out of the way. Let's get some of this stuff tidied up.